Hi, I'm David Houle. I'm a futurist, an author, and a speaker. And obviously, since COVID, I've been doing all my keynotes virtually online here in my green screen studio. So, first, I want to thank you for having me as your keynote for this fall in the absence of an in person meeting. Bill Axline reached out to me after he heard me do a presentation and requested that I do this keynote for you. So, first of all, I want to thank Bill Axline for bringing me in. So, if you really like this keynote, all kudos go to him. If you don't like it, it's on me, okay? So I want to thank the HGA and Bill has spent some time talking to me about your history. And of course, I've read it. And it's really a wonderful history of friendship and camaraderie, 70 years in the making. And I'm really happy to be able to speak to you this fall. And I want to acknowledge Keith Anderson, who by popular acclaim and COVID is the first president since World War II to have a 2-year term. So good for you. And I hope this decade works out well for you. And I want to thank Jonathan Mize, who is coming to become president in 2022, which, as you will hear, is probably the first recovery aspect from COVID that we're going to have. It's not going to happen really much until 2022. And I gather that the two of you are from Kansas, and I didn't know Kansas much until my son went to KU. So I love Lawrence, Kansas. And I think Lawrence, Kansas is one of the great small towns in America. And the obvious joke there is, so Wilt Chamberlain, William Burroughs, and Bob Dole walk into a bar because they all live there. So anyway, I like Kansas, and I think Kansas is a good American state. I grew up in the Midwest in Chicago. So all of you from the Midwest, happy to see you. So today I want to talk to you about this decade. Clearly, this decade is the most disruptive decade in history, and that's the title of my presentation. And I want you to think about the fact that it's kind of like writing, COVID is to the 2020s as riding a bicycle is, right? I mean, it is training wheels for this decade. We're learning how to live with disruption with our training wheels on for COVID, but it's a good metaphor for this decade because it's going to be one of disruption. So let me go into the PowerPoint right away and bring it up for you. And to get right into it here. So let me get this going. So you can see the most disruptive decade in history. So obviously the question is, so how's the decade started out for you? And I always say when I speak to audiences, whether they're 2,000 or 3,000 or 200 or 300 before COVID, that I want you to suspend what you think reality is, because reality is constantly changing. And the obvious example is what you thought reality was in January is not the reality you've been living since March. So reality changes, so it's not fixed. So what this is going to be is a high-level look into the most disruptive decade in history. So it's based on the book that I published in May, end of May this year. I wanted to have it out earlier, but COVID disrupts everything, right? So it is the most disruptive decade. This is one of up to 10 books. They're all going to be short. This one's like 100 pages, 10 chapters. And I'm going to do a series of books. I'm working on the second one now. And over the next 3 or 4 years, there'll be 10 different copies. So to guide us through this decade. So, and COVID-19, I've put in this updated version. So when you see a C19, it's a reference point that one of the points I'm making has already been manifested by COVID. So the short and medium, as I say, long-term trends by COVID will be noted here with the C19 next to the bullet. Of course, I like saying that. So how's the first 9 months or 10 months of the decade been for you? And this is the outside force that triggers the collapse of legacy thinking quickly. I'll talk about legacy thinking in a few minutes. But basically, when a disruption happens, everything gets accelerated and changed quickly. So in this decade, there's been a misappropriation of Darwin. He wasn't really about the survival of the fittest and survival of the strongest. He was about the survival of the most adaptive. And so the two key things that you as leaders have to do is you have to learn how to be ever more adaptive, and you have to learn how to be ever more resilient, because it's adaptive capability and resilience that will get you through this decade. It's not strength and it's not being fit. It's being adaptive and resilient. So this, and this is an arbitrary 17 years, this is the most transformative time in human history. There will be more change in this period than any 50-year period in history, literally. Realities we know it will change. And again, COVID-19. The reality is I'm giving a keynote to you via Zoom in my green screen studio that used to be my office. And you're all sitting at the convenience of wherever you are and whenever you want to read it. So to listen to this. So realities we know it will change. And creative destruction, Schumpeter's historical theory, the old will give way to the new in massive qualities and quantities around the world in all different aspects of our lives, and it will happen very quickly across the board. I can't think of any aspect of society, culture, business, politics, economics that's not going to undergo some change in this decade. This is something that I have found as a futurist that I really have to press on people. People go, when is it going to return to normal? What's the new normal going to be? When are things going to come back? That's false thinking. In this decade, and usually in most decades, things don't come back. They bounce forward. So it's not when is the economy going to bounce back, it's how is it going to bounce forward. And the other thing is that while we are in COVID, and we're going to be in COVID at least a year to a year from now, because of the nature of us, United States, being the plague nation of the world, it's going to take a long time because it just hasn't happened. There hasn't been, there's been a lack of leadership. Don't need to go into that. But all research shows that it takes 3 to 4 weeks to create a new habit. Procter & Gamble did a lot of that back in the studies back in the 70s, which is why there was, free products so you could develop an affinity for that. So in the period of the 6-7 months, look how we've changed our habits. We don't commute, we work from home, we work all hours of the day and night. Some of you who may have kids at home appreciate what it is to be an educator. So things are not going back. The only normal in this decade is abnormality. So just understand that. Now, the major dynamics of the decade, I'll put them all 4 of them up and talk about them, and I'll get into them all through the presentation. The age of intelligence. This is the decade that's really going to be the end of a final mapping of the brain. Neuroscience will fully complete its ever more inquisitive research as to what our brain is. Sorry for that. But this is also going to lead to artificial intelligence. So we're going to have neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and new mapping of the brain means new ways of computing. So as we map the brain, we're going to have different kinds of computing, whether they be parallel or quantum computing. The age of climate change, of course. I'm the futurist who's known as the futurist who's most insightful in climate change. I've spoken to NASA. They invited me to speak to them in the EPA. And it really is the existential threat. So this is the decade where humanity will have to make fundamental changes in our trajectory and our relationship with the planet. There's a new emerging collective and global consciousness that's kicking in. Kind of, if you think of the pulsating synaptic, all of the world's knowledge sits here on the internet. It's a new connective consciousness that will start kicking in towards the end of the decade. And of course, the reinvention of capitalism and democracy. I'll talk about both of those, but basically both of these things, capitalism and democracy, came into being in the latter part of the 18th century, the 1700s. And in fact, Adam Smith, the great philosopher of capitalism, died in 1792, even before the industrial age began. So both of these are going to be necessarily reinvented in this decade globally. So basically, I'm known as the futurist who said we've left the information age and entered the shift age. And so let me give you a little bit of that background because we're still in it. The first characteristic about the shift age is that the flow to global. Everything is going global. It's beyond the global economy. We're in the global stage of human evolution. We've gone from family to tribe to village to city state to nation state. Now, only remaining boundaries now are planetary. So we're getting organized around all of us. At the same time, there's the flow to the individual. You as individuals have more power than individuals have ever had before in history. So this is happening. And it's occurred in the United States because of the explosion of choice. When there's an explosion of choice, the power moves from the producer to the consumer, from the institution to the individual. So it is these two things getting organized around all of us and each of us. And the middle in between is increasingly not going to hold. And the interesting thing is both of these have been powered by the single most powerful force existing on the planet today, accelerating electronic connectedness. So, and it's not the internet, it's really, you know, this thing, the smartphone. And basically what this smartphone does is it gets rid of distance. So for example, if I were to call my wife who's in the other part of the house, it would take 5 seconds, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, her cell phone would ring. If I were to call the colleagues I have in China who bring me into China to talk, or at least used to physically, it might be another 2 seconds because of the relay of the satellite or the cable under the ocean. So the difference between 50 feet and 10,000 miles is 2 seconds. So there's no time or distance that limits human communication. And in fact, there's no time, distance, or place that limits it. So what happens with this accelerating electronic connectedness? It creates two realities: the physical reality based on atoms and the screen reality based on digits. And it is the screen reality that is giving us this alternative reality here. And reality in the future comes from the screen. So in other words, 10 years ago, I started saying there'd be a huge collapse in physical retail, something that you've all experienced, right? Why did I do that? Because of something on the screen reality called Amazon.com. So while hardware stores might be competing with one another, or department stores, remember them, used to look at one another, they didn't see the screen reality. And again, Airbnb, Uber. So you have to realize that there's two realities going on, and you have to live and manage both of them. Roughly, I've always been asked about how long I think the shift age will last. That's at 25, 30 years. So this is purely arbitrary years, but it's around this time. So think of the shift age as the age where we're transitioning from the reality that most of us grew up with. If we're over the age of 40, we spent the majority of our life in the 20th century, now in the 21st century. So the reality is that we've got this new reality by the mid-2030s. So think of the shift age as the transition, why it's so disruptive between the reality and history up to 2000 and the reality we're going to be living in the 2030s. So that led to 2010. In January 1st, 2010, I coined this decade, just recently we've exited, as the transformation decade. This is the definition of transformation: change in form, appearance, nature, or character. So this is the decade that really we started to move to really 21st century thought and the collapse of legacy thinking. Legacy thinking is from the past. It is the thought from the past has created the reality of the present, and the thinking today is going to create the reality going forward. So when I've done lots of corporate retreats, probably about 30 of them, about 10 Fortune 500 companies. And I always check in with them 6 months later. So how's it going? And it was really interesting to me because I thought this was a clever concept. I came up with my book, Entering the Shift Age in 2012, but it really took root in corporate America because they would say, David, we're trying to come up with new solutions without using legacy thinking from the past. So legacy thinking is really from the last century. So I think future historians are going to look back on this decade, 2010 to 2020, and say, this was the first decade of 21st century thought. And I suggest to you, for those of you that raise your hand if I say you remember the 60s, the 60s didn't begin January 1st, 1960. They began November 22nd, 1963 with the Kennedy assassination. And then in 3 months later, in February of 1964, the Beatles. And then 3 months later after that, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, escalating the war in Vietnam. So the way we look back on the 60s, rock and roll and assassinations and the war in Vietnam really started in the decade. So this is why we powered into this century with thought from the last. So this decade really is introducing us, and the 2020s is going to obliterate the past thinking. So which brings us to the 2020s. So it's going to be a decade of cognitive dissonance. This is the subtitle of my second book. So what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance occurs when change speeds up. And so the time when the current past reality is giving way to the new future reality. So all of you will have to manage both. So you have the cognitive dissonance about, well, this is the way I've been successful, but how do I have to adapt? And COVID is the perfect metaphor for that. What have you had to do? You had to go digital. You had to increase the move to the screen reality from the physical reality. And your relationships are now in both. So you have to manage both the past and the future at the same time, which causes this cognitive dissonance. So the way you have been successful, you have to continue, but you can't resist finding the new ways in your respective businesses to have to change. I'm a big person in quotes, and these 4 quotes that you're going to see are in the front of the book, The Most Disruptive Decade in History. In the revelation of any truth, there are 3 stages. In the first, it is ridiculed. In the second, it is resisted. And in the third, it's considered self-evident. So the world is flat. The sun revolves around the earth. Climate change is a hoax. Right? So inevitably, we're going to have a lot of self-evidency coming up in this decade. This is the best quote about the future I've ever read, and I've managed to put it into all my books. We should try to be the parents of our future rather than the offspring of our past. You should try to parent the future of your business and your association and not be the offspring of the past. You've got a wonderful history as an association, but don't let that constrain you for the newness. Take the fundamental values, friendship, camaraderie, and spin them forward. This is a great quote. So a little bit of an aside, as a futurist, I stand on the shoulders of the 3 great futurists of the last 75 years, Dr. Alvin Toffler, R. Buckminster Fuller, and Marshall McLuhan. And this is from Toffler. And in 2005, he was asked the question, what is the future of education? And he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So within education, that means lifelong learning, of course. And but what I want to say to you as CEOs and C-level suite executives, the most important verb you're going to have to learn to matriculate this decade is unlearning. It's an active verb. You're going to have to learn new things, unlearn what you learned, and then relearn new ones. As an aging baby boomer, when I graduated from college a long time ago, the graduates around them were being told, boomers, you're going to have more than one job in your lifetime, because obviously a lot of boomer parents had one career, one job for a whole lifetime. Graduates today are being told, graduates, you're going to have 3 to 5 careers, 2 or 3 of which have yet to be invented. So, lifelong learning is the only way out. But for CEOs, it is really about unlearning. Don't rest on your laurels, or all of a sudden you'll say, what happened? Now, I happen to be a big fan of Bruce Lee. And for me, I put this in because as I was writing the conclusion to this book, COVID had started. And I realized that my whole business is gone, right? I was a guy that got on, drove to airports, 2 or 3 airports, 2 or 3 airplanes, got someplace, 2,000 people spoke, shook hands, all that. So my business model went from 100% to zero in terms of revenue. So for me, COVID is about how do I change and be like water? Don't get into one form. Be like water. Be formless and shapeless like water. You put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put it into the bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Also, water can crash and it can erode and it can flow. So for me, the metaphor, and it might work for you as well, is be like water. Whatever the new limitations, whatever the new reality, whatever the new marketplace is, flow right in. Don't resist it or wait for it to come back, as I said earlier, because it's not going to. So be like water. For me, that's the metaphor that I'm kind of reinventing myself within the COVID shape. So generations, and I think this is important for hardware, because I think increasingly it used to be everybody was kind of like to tinker and to go to hardware stores. And I think that's changed. So we're at a really significant time in America and in the world, a generational change. So in my book, Entering the Shift Age, that as I said, I wrote in 2012, I gave these arbitrary birth years for these two generations. The millennials born 1981 and 1997, and the digital natives, some people call them Generation Z, but what do you go, double A, double B, go through the alphabet again. So I call them digital natives. The interesting thing is these two generations in the United States are already in the majority, and they're both each now bigger than the baby boom ever was. So the millennials are larger than the baby boom ever was numerically, and the digital natives are also bigger than the baby boom was in the heyday of the boomers. So these two generations are in the majority this year. So if because you have them working for you, millennials, or they may be your kids, or maybe you have grandkids and they're digital natives, you know how different they are than boomers or Gen Xers, which I think is probably most of the people in this association. So just think about how that differentness in the generations is going to affect your business. I mean, these are your future employees and they're your future customers. So they're in the majority. And the interesting thing is that if this is a global trend, by the way, I mean, half of the people in Nigeria are under the age of 21. 2/3 of the people who live in India are under the age of 35. So this is globally. So we have this tsunami of two new generations taking over. And it's a really powerful thing, and it's going to change your business. So you have to think about how you're going to adapt to this. And I have some suggestions coming up shortly. But this is huge. And if you and I think if you look at Black Lives Matters, and before that, Stoneham Douglas here in Florida, the kids, that survived went up to Washington, D.C. after the shooting to lobby for gun control. And when they came back, David Hogg, one of the leaders, 18-year-old guy, was asked the question by the media, well, what do you think about the fact that not a single Republican senator would meet with you? And he said, they're a bunch of old white guys. They're going to die. I'm not. So the inevitability of change politically, they're much more active. So I think by 2024, certainly by 2028, these will be in the voting majority of this country. Think about that. So economic trends. These are dominant, overarching trends. Ownership to rental and access society, the sharing economy. This started out back in a decade ago when the Great Recession had a collapse in ownership of homes. and it was like 67.8% of all homes, all families own their own homes. We're never going to get to that again. Multi-unit went up, rental went up. But look at your content. Do you buy DVDs or stream from Netflix? Do you even buy MP3, let alone CDs, or stream from Spotify? So all our content is getting to be rented. Because I pay an extra $10 a month as a Prime member on Amazon, I have 100,000 books I can read for free every month if I could read that fast, right? So it's an access. So it's increasing even to cars. The three big German manufacturers, you can now rent a new car. So first you had to buy it, then you could lease it. Now you can rent it. So everything is moving to a rental. So think about how that might change. I mean, there's environmental groups that have neighborhoods where one guy has a fully stocked garage and the neighbors all use it. I mean, probably everybody needs a hammer, but you don't need a chainsaw every day, and you don't need a saw every day. So there may be a business model here for certain aspects of some of your businesses where you can take advantage of rental. We rent these tools, you don't have to buy them. And you can set up a rental. And the good thing about that is you get repeat, whereas a purchase may be one time and then the guy may come back. But if you have a rental, you're always developing and people will become reliant on you. So there may be a rental business model in your future. Anything in the 20th century is getting decentralized. I mean, look how we're working. We have the most decentralized workplace in history right now. We're working from home or wherever you are. And so anything that's becoming centralized is of the last century. Decentralization and distributed energy, distributed workplace, decentralization. Even Amazon, the most valuable company in the world, has 3 new headquarters. Of course, the primary one is in Seattle, but they just built the Lord and Taylor. Bought the Lord and Taylor building on Fifth Avenue, New York, to make it their headquarters, right? So the decentralization, multiple headquarters for the most valuable company in the world. Place to space. Again, COVID-19. You and I, me, speaker, you audience, are spatially distributed, right? We're not in one place. So the concept of place is becoming less and less important. We're connected in a spatial way. I don't know where my products come from Amazon, but I order them here in my office, and then they show up in the door. I don't have to go any place to get it. So increasingly, your business is going to be a spatial business. A lot of you may have names that are geographical. Think of colleges, the University of Michigan, the University of Kansas University, right? Well, you probably heard of the University of Southern New Hampshire. It's the second largest online learning college in the United States, but it's in New Hampshire, but most of its students are outside. So we're getting ever more moving from place to space. Value-based corporate advocacy. We are moving into a time where governments are bankrupt, governments are dysfunctional. They're running deficits. They can't get anything done. Just look at Washington as a case, or look at your state houses, right? So it is the time in history where corporations need to step up and face the common good. And one of the things that's so important about that, if you call the generations, is that millennials want to make a difference. So if you're trying to hire a really qualified millennial and your competitor who wants that woman as well, just offers money, if you can meet the same money or even less, but you say, well, we give paid leave of a week so you can go work for Habitat Humanity or whatever it is, you power them to pay them for a week of volunteering or have a mission, whether it's climate control or something, the climate change that you're facing. It's very important. So you're increasingly going to be asked by potential employees, what is your value? How are you making a difference? How are you facing the common good? And if you just say, we're all about money, well, then the person who comes to you working for you just about money is going to leave because of money. So what is your corporate advocacy relative to the common good. And again, physical to digital, a dematerialization. Here we are. I'm doing a digitally delivered virtual keynote to you. So things are moving from physical to digital. And I'm not sure you have a variety of businesses all in the hardware, but this will affect some of you more than others. Certainly digital sales. You can't have digital hammers, but you can have digital sales, right? So think about that. Now, the new corporate realities. I'm going to put these two up. The only way to structure your company today is to be customer centric. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I was running sales organizations, the president of the company would talk to the president of the company, get their card and give it to the head of sales, right? So it's sales that deals with the customer. Not any longer. The CEO down to the loading dock guy all need to be able to state to anyone, so what does your company do? The brand promise of 2 or 3 sentences. So everybody in the company, the person that answers the phone, the person that delivers the product, the person that serves the customer, the C-suite, all need to be customer centric. That's the only way to be in the 2020s, okay? And culture, purpose, and vision eat strategy for lunch. This is a lift from Mark Andreessen, who invented the browser. And he said, he said that software will eat strategy for lunch. First of all, forget strategy. How is your 3-year strategy document doing so far this year, right? At best, strategy is an 18-month, no longer 3-year. It's an 18-month action plan, okay? But it doesn't make any difference. How good is your culture? What is the purpose? And what is your vision? I've advised lots of companies and I've spoken to more than 4,000 CEOs or business owners. And whenever one of them says, I spent so much money in recruitment and I spent a lot of money on retention, the first thing I say is, tell me about your culture. Because if you have a great culture, you won't have turnover. And in fact, you won't have to spend anything to recruit, because all you have to do is if everybody likes the culture so much, they're busy telling their friends, they're busy telling their competitors, they're busy telling everybody. So all you need to do, if you want to hire somebody for accounts receivable, just say, we need somebody from accounts receivable. Does anybody know anybody can do that can add to our culture? And somebody will know somebody, right? Purpose, I touched on. What is the purpose of your company other than making money, other than customer satisfaction? We're taking a position to rid whatever in the neighborhood, graffiti, or we go out and we clean, if you're near a beach, we clean plastic from the beach on the weekends, and we do it with our corporate flag high. So, that's a purpose that goes beyond the bottom line. Vision. I'm a vision guy because I'm a futurist, right? So some of you may be as old as I am to remember Kennedy, or at least know the Kennedy story, right? So in spring of 1961, he stood in front of Congress and said, by the end of the decade, something diffuse and far away, we will successfully land on the moon and safely bring him home. Now, the point was, when he said that, we hadn't even put Shepard up for a 90-minute, we hadn't orbited Glenn around the planet. So what did NASA do? Well, they went, okay, so in 1969, by the end of the decade, we have to put 1 or 2 men on the moon, which probably means we have to have a landing and we need to have 2 vehicles. And before that, we need to know we go out to the moon and come back. And before that, we need to simulate that time to go to the moon, to land and come back. So we'll have people orbiting around the planet for that amount of time, 3 people, and then 2 people, and then 1. So they worked back. So vision means, for example, if I were to say to you, in 7 years, in 2026, 2027, where do you want your business to be? Now that puts you in an uncomfortable position, because the most a CEO can really think is 5 years out. So you're going to have to create a vision, and then you work back to it. So for example, I'm not sure when some of you are going to see this, most of you are going to probably see it in November. So by November, you will have your October actuals. Now, what have you done? Now, this year may be the exception, but you're going to take your October actuals and compare them to the October actuals of 2019. Instead, if you have a vision of where you want to be in 6 or 7 years, sold the company, triple the top line, triple EBITDA, whatever it is, you work back. So you take your October 2020 actuals and compare them to the October 2021 actuals that you will need to reach your vision, right? So just by flipping it, you're measuring yourself against your vision, okay? Now, one thing about Kennedy. So 2 days later, this is an apocryphal story, okay? James Webb, the great leader of NASA in the 1960s, sat down with his direct reports 2 days after Kennedy said that. And he said, gentlemen, we're going to do something that has never been done. The president's asked us to do something that's never been done, using technology that's yet to be invented, on a timeline that's incredibly fast, and to make safety number one. Let's get to work. Now, that's a perfect line for the 2020s. You're going to have to do something you've never done before, using technology that's yet to be invented, to do it in a short time frame, and to make your version of whatever safety is the most important thing. So think about that. Every company, I can't think of almost any company, and COVID has accelerated this. That's why I have C19 here. Every company is going to have more technology they're going to use. They're going to have fewer people, and you're going to have more ongoing training. Okay. The training aspect is in part because of the technology, but also with the rapidity of change, lifelong learning, right? So in the recession, a lot of companies, small to medium up to 500 million, got rid of their training. They cut personnel. They did everything. And then when the economy came back, is we don't have enough training people. We don't have qualified people. We can't find qualified, technically oriented people. And that's because you didn't keep training. Unlike Germany and their manufacturing companies that always train people, and if they have to put them on part-time to keep them, they keep them. So more tech, fewer people, more training. Actively committed to the common good. I'm pounding this into you. Lawrence Fink, the founder of BlackRock, who manages $6.5 trillion in his portfolio, 2 years ago said that this is the most important thing for corporate America and international corporations, that to some degree, they're going to be measured on their commitment to the common good. And he, in fact, will measure them as to whether he invests in them or not. So this is a huge trend, and you as association maybe is the right way to do it. Some of you larger ones, larger companies in the association might be able to do it independently, but as an association, maybe you can commit to the common good, whatever is in the DNA of HGA and where that might flow. We in HGA are committed to not giving 2% of our triple net EBITDA to the United Way, but something that makes a difference that's related to hardware. Understanding and embracing new technologies. That's where I'm going to go right now. It's imperative. I mean, how many of us knew how to do Zoom back in January versus now? And that's why it's such a great metaphor. You've had to learn stuff very quickly, technologies. Oh, how do I unmute? Stuff like that, right? That's a future. Now let's go into this. But, oh, no, sorry. I wanted to talk about HGA in the 2020s. That's from your website, friendship through business. So as big companies are taking over, and as things get weird and change rapidly, this is one of your key points. So friendship through business, I sense is from the DNA of how the organization got together, right? Friends, distributors, retailers, all that. Think of this as your motto for your customer base. You want to make your customers friends. Now, friends know you well. Friends will forgive you. Friends will open up to you. Friends will tell you things they don't know. And you want to be their friend, right? Friendship is one of the highest forms of relationship. And if you're a boomer, I've heard so many boomers say, well, face-to-face is the only way to close the deal. No, it's not. In this new age, in the shift age, in the 2020s, you have relationships that are face-to-face, relationships that are on Zoom and video, relationships that are on email, relationships that are on text, relationships in all different ways. So how do you bring your friendship through business to all aspects of engagement? So multiple levels of relationship. Relationship is no longer just face-to-face or walk-in traffic, right? So it's far more. For example, the greatest relationship I have with a company is with Amazon. You may not like to hear that, but it's true. They know everything that I like. They probably know more about me and my proclivities and my desires and my curiosities and my purchases than some of my best friends. And so think about that. How do you develop a relationship that is beyond what you have defined it for up to this point? So digital friendships. And again, HGA members have friendship through business. That's how you've conducted. You've gotten together and you've golfed every year, except for this year, right? And maybe next year, because I think it's still going to be with us. So how do HGA members develop friendships with their customers? Not just good relationships, but friendships. People will pay more to interact with a friend. People will trust friends more. People will go to friends first for advice. So make your customers your friends. Take this DNA of the association and push it out into your business relationships across the board. This is what I was saying. I forgot I put this up. But, you know, I love Amazon. What Amazon may do to your industry is that as Amazon disintermediated retailers to a great degree, Amazon is about ready to disintermediate wholesalers. Okay, I don't know how that resonates with some of you, but it's inevitable, because back in 2010, they only had 4 or 5 huge distribution centers. And now they have multiple ones. They have at least one in every state, multiple ones in the large states. So increasingly, OEM manufacturers are just going to ship to Amazon. And I know a company right now that has a really cool gaming thing for kids that's coming out, and they had it shipped to China and went right to the Amazon fulfillment. And they had all the relations set up with Amazon. So they're there. So that's one of the things that I think is going to affect your industry, is the disintermediation of wholesaling. Wholesaling has just been inventory and regional sales or regional delivery. Well, Amazon's going to be doing that to some degree. So keep that in mind. So I think and this may sound simplistic, but as we go more digital, as we have less physical relationships where you're shaking hands, this friendship through business has to migrate into all aspects of what you do. So Humanity Now, this is interesting, okay? So you've probably seen this. I put it up in all my presentations because I want to make a couple of points. First of all, 1900, Easter morning, spot the automobile. In 1900, on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, there was one automobile. Now, 13 years later, spot the horse. There wasn't one. First point, more than 100 years ago, when the speed of change was perhaps 1/100th of what it is now, this happened in 13 years. So everything I'm telling you that's going to happen in this decade, you have to accept as possibility. But here's the interesting thing. If you go back to 1900 and there was only one car and the rest were horses, what was the #1 environmental hazard if you lived in Manhattan? Horse manure, right? Other people call it other things. And what happened? Well, the solution for horse manure in 1900 was a big canvas and leather strap bag that was strapped on to the back of the horse. And then at the end of the day, the carriage drivers would go to the Hudson. That's what you did. You went to the west side and you dropped the horse manure into the river, right? That was the answer. They didn't see that the answer to horse manure was a new drivetrain, right? So, so uh, an example I use is there's some really altruistic women who have set up coding schools for grade school girls because it's a Guysville thing to teach girls how to code. The problem with that is that by the time they get to high school, let alone college, computers are already self-coding. So it won't be needed, right? It's kind of like my father, who worked his way through the Depression by typing term papers for rich kids, made me learn how to type. Well, by the time I was in the 7th grade and learned how to type, the only job I could have gotten was in the typing pool, and that was for women anyway. So the point is that current solutions projected in the future never work. The drivetrain was what solved horse manure, okay? So the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. William Gibson coined the phrase cyberspace. Started writing science fiction. Now he writes science fact because it's caught up. So in some of you are in locations where the future isn't as present as it is otherwise. You know, think of New York and Silicon Valley. They live much more in the future, or the tech parts of those countries, neighborhoods do, than say the middle of the country, Kansas, Nebraska, right? So the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So you're going to have customers, you're going to have people who work for you who are much more into the future than others. And that's a management issue going forward. So here are the technologies, the ascending technologies, nanotechnology. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. This is going to manifest itself first in medical and healthcare. Brain-computer interface, early stage telepathy. This has been known as BMI, brain-machine interface. And it was always thought of as the Holy Grail once we can connect our minds to the computers. I call it brain-computer interface. Right now, you can, it's available, it's not widely available. You can go out and you can get a cap that picks up your brainwaves. And you can sit and you can focus and you can think. So if this computer, for example, was brainwave computer active, I could just think next bullet point, it would come up. So this is going mainstream. And one of the things I talked about was consciousness earlier, right? So by 2025, this is going to be probably half of the world is going to be, half of the developed world will be doing brainwave computer interface. Remember, we went from other people interfacing for us to the computer, it was mainframe, to us doing it on a keyboards, to then doing it on touch, and now voice, Siri or Alexa or whatever, right? So now it's going to move to the brain. Well, if we have several years at the latter part of this decade where lots of us are doing brainwave computer interface, the next step is to go brain to brain. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but we are moving rapidly in that direction. In fact, there are some people out there investigating the uploading of memory and consciousness to the cloud by the end of this decade. So this is happening. AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality. Some of you probably experience augmented reality. And of course, some of you may put on the headsets of virtual reality. This is a game changer. This is going to change education more than computers, because when you can say, take a kid on a field trip, and instead of hearing the, hi, over here is this dinosaur, look at that, the kids will have the augmented reality glasses on, and it's the merging of the physical reality and the screen reality. So as you are seeing this dinosaur in the dinorama, you're going to be seeing all the stuff from the screen reality about when that lived and how big it was and everything about it, right? In virtual reality, whenever you alter reality, you change the game. I think one of the residuals of COVID is going to be the explosion of virtual reality, because if we can't travel, you know, I'd really like to be in the south of France. I'd like to be in the Amalfi Coast. I'd like to go back to the islands of Croatia, but I can't because of COVID. And, you know, I'm 70 and I don't want to fly. So maybe virtual. So we're going to get into our individual realities. I don't know how that's going to affect your business, but for example, if once virtual reality becomes a little more mainstream, there'll be, here's how to change the light bulb. I mean, that would be, here's how to change a muffler. here's how to install whatever, and you just put it on. So there may be a augmented reality, virtual reality revenue stream ahead for the hardware industry. I don't know that, but it sounds logical, right? You take somebody who has worked on Chevrolets all their life, and then they go over to a much more high-tech Japanese car, say, or something, and they just do virtual reality, and they learn how to deal with all the new technology, self-trained. Blockchain. Blockchain has a lot of hype. Blockchain is known because of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the cryptocurrency that, because of blockchain, it came into existence. I'm now working with some people who I think have it finally put together. Blockchain is going to transform finance, and it's going to transform practically everything. And it's going to take, blockchain will verify the source of something. So for example, the diamond industry is already on blockchain because people don't want to buy blood diamonds. So by putting the whole diamond industry on blockchain, we know the source of the actual mine where that diamond came from. And IBM has helped Maersk, the largest shipping container company in the world, put their entire shipping industry on blockchain. I didn't know this till I got into it, but shipping is the most paper intensive industry there is, because every single port, you have to do all the paperwork at each and every container, right? And so by putting on a blockchain, you eliminate the paperwork. You just see the origination of each of these, right? So what blockchain does is it eliminates the middleman for financial transactions, and it documents the source of everything. Like for PPE, for example, with COVID, it kept coming from China and it was infected, right? So blockchain would make sure that the PPE that you're buying for your family, or you're buying for your employees, or you're selling at your store, you're distributing, whatever, comes from a validated source of purity. So the origination, so blockchain is going to be huge. Implantable chips. Right now, there's somewhere around 250,000 people in the United States who have Parkinson's. And because we know where Parkinson's resides in the brain, we can implant a chip in there and just press a button on a hand device on your smartphone. And if you have this, it stops just by pressing a button, right? So we already have implanted chips. As I said, neuroscience is going to map the whole brain by the end of this decade. So one of the things we're learning is memory, because memory takes multiple parts of the brain. So prior to COVID, at least to the end of last year, the research showed that by 2022 at the earliest, so maybe 2023, there'll be implantable memory chips. Superficially, think of a technological solution to Alzheimer's. But the reality is that we're going to be able to do that, right? I mean, the joke among futurists that I talk about is, hey, you're going to get the short-term memory chip first or the long-term memory chip, right? So anyway, implantable chips. So we're going to be able to help ourselves by triggering things in our brains externally and internally. Okay, the implantable chip is internal, but there's going to be external as well. Additive printing. You've probably heard of 3D printing. A lot of you probably already into it. But additive printing is going to change everything in terms of supply chains. It's going to eliminate a lot of supply chains, and it's going to make custom be the same cost as scale. You can get a custom made car and just bring in the drivetrain and the tires and go in and order it, have it custom to you, and pick it up at the same location in 30 days, right? So, relative to supply chain, I think what's going to happen as a result of COVID is that we're going to bring a lot of manufacturing back to the United States. I mean, it's outrageous as an American that we couldn't get long cotton swabs. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Or we had to get all our masks from China. So I think what you're going to have is a repatriation of manufacturing and manufacturing jobs, and that's going to change the supply chain. And I think that Buy American is going to come back up. And I think that a lot of what we as a country have found ourselves at risk because we've offloaded everything. That's going to come back. An evidence I see already is that, you know, office real estate is going to collapse, commercial real estate is going to collapse, retail real estate is going to collapse. But the one thing that is going up is manufacturing retail, because we're bringing it back. So small manufacturers are going to be reascended. And I think that's really important for your industry. I don't know how it affects different individuals of the association, but I think the repatriation of manufacturing is definitely a trend in the near term. So evolutionary change. If you think about modern inventions, electricity is the most important one. I mean, after fire and after the wheel, most other inventions need electricity. But the interesting thing is electricity has changed, as an invention, has changed how humans live on the planet more than any other single invention, right? It gave us air conditioning so we could populate the sun belt. It gave us microwave ovens and all this stuff in kitchens. You know, before 1900, the only thing in the kitchen was a stove, right? And then there was a refrigerator and a coffee maker and everything else. So electricity, we can live in the South Pole, we can live in the North Pole, we can live in the desert because of electricity. AI, artificial intelligence, is going to change how we live on the planet as much as electricity has. But the thing about it right now is that it's very difficult to predict. So most current conversations are from current, soon to be legacy thinking. So think about the light bulb. When we first saw electricity, it was a flickering light. All we knew was that it would bring light to dark, extend the day. Well, we couldn't see microwave ovens. We couldn't see flat screen TVs. We couldn't see an air-conditioned sunbelt. So what we're seeing right now with artificial intelligence is just a fraction of its possibilities going forward. It's going to be as significant to humanity and life in general on this planet as electricity. So back in 2016, when AlphaGo beat the greatest Go player, AlphaGo being artificial intelligence, I started getting back into artificial intelligence, realizing that it's starting to accelerate. But I was really frustrated by the stupidity of the conversation around it. So I looked up the definition of intelligence in 5 dictionaries. This one's from dictionary.com. Not one of the 5 definitions had the word human in it. So why do we call it artificial? Whales are intelligent. Dolphins are intelligent. Some of you have called your pets intelligent, right? So intelligence exists outside humanity. So I think, and you know, here's the definition of artificial. I know I'm swimming upstream here, but I think one of the reasons that we are not embracing artificial intelligence is because of the fact that artificial is less than, right? The only time artificial was ever better than the real thing for me in my life was in the early 90s, and I was at a ski resort and it wasn't snowing. Hey, but we have artificial snow, so we can open up 5 runs. Great, right? But everything else is diminished. So I think in some subliminal way, sub-linguistic way, we calling it artificial intelligence means that it's less than. It's less than us. So instead, I call it technological intelligence, because that's what it is. Technology is gaining intelligence. It's a human-initiated, technologically enhanced technology that in partnership creates the next level of intelligence. So I call it TI, not AI, and I submit that you start using that term and you'll get into clearer focus around it. It's not either or, but in partnership. It's going to transform most aspects of economics, and it's even going to usher in the next stage of human evolution. I see human evolution starting in the 2030s is an evolutionary leap forward of the merger of humanity and technology. And why is this so significant? So is that about is 1,000 terabytes, and each terabyte was 1,000 gigabytes, right? So in 2020, humanity is going to create this amount of data globally. And here's how it goes up. So in 20 years, we're going to go from 35 created zettabytes of data in 1 year to 12,000. So right at the time we have this huge data explosion, we've created a technology beyond the capacity of the cerebral cortex to manage all of this. So right at the right time, we've created a new technology to help us manage data. And we've all heard the not really accurate cliche, data is the new oil. Every one of you is increasingly using data more than you did a year ago, certainly 5 or 10 years ago. And technological intelligence is going to help you do that. So it's intelligence accelerated. It enlarges, deepens, and faster analysis. It's the golden age of neuroscience. The brain becomes known, as I was saying. So computing gets redesigned, as I mentioned to you earlier, and external plugins, internal implants. So the age of intelligence is on us. So in summary, technological intelligence, Internet of Things, and big data. Technological intelligence, transformational technology at the right time will impact every business and life sector. And it's not either or, but compatible collaboration for economic and evolutionary growth. So you have to embrace this. You have to learn it. You have to open yourself up to this. Now, what is this going to do? You know, Arthur C. Clarke, 2001. So 1950s, Clarke said the goal of the future is full unemployment. And Bertrand Russell, 100 years ago, a little more sophisticated statement, said to be able to fill leisure intelligently is the last product of civilization. Right now, we define leisure. So what do you do when you're not working? But what technological intelligence is going to do is it's going to free people from having to work, or at least a significant proportion of them in the developed countries. So for example, if I were to meet you on the street and I go, hi, my name's David. And you go, hi, my name's Jonathan. Okay, what's the next thing I would ask that individual? Jonathan, what do you do? Right? A significant percent of the population by 2030 will no longer have that. So what I'm trying to suggest is rather than backing into 20, 30, 40, 50% unemployment because of the evisceration of jobs by technological intelligence, instead we face forward and go, how can we harness the greatest unleashing of human potential in history? Because for the first time, a significant part of the population will not have to work and will not be self-identified by the job that they do, or the job that they have, or the employment track that they're on. Now, this means, and it will, because I'll be talking about capitalism, democracy, we have to change the tax code, we have to change the policies. You know, what the PPP and the other CARES Act did is that it got money directly into the hands of people, rather than going through corporate and the banks got $150 billion in loan fees. The stuff that worked was the $1,200 fee, the $1,200 payment went right to the individual. So the universal basic income, for example. So this is all, employment's going to be turned upside down because of artificial technological intelligence. So that brings us to the definition of self. What's the new mindset if you're not working, right? Massive change in thinking. What's the non-job definition of self? Complete recasting of tax and social codes and policies, the global common good goals, national service, for example. Right now, with 30 million people unemployed, and graffiti everywhere, and crumbling infrastructure, and trees needing to be planted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we should have national service, mandatory, between the age of 18 and 25, say, or something. You have to do it. Now, to come back to the non-job definition of self, companies that hit the timing right for this are going to be huge. Starbucks is an example. Most people think Starbucks succeeded because they persuaded us to spend a lot more on coffee than we ever had before. But they created the third place. When Starbucks started its international expansion in the 80s, and first in the United States, of course, only 1% of the working population in the United States in the 80s were independent contractors. Today, that's 12, before COVID, it was 12%. So as that grew, Starbucks grew. Like I've worked as an independent contractor from my home for 20 years. So where do we meet? Oh, let's meet at Starbucks. It's the third place. So what is the new place that's going to come up when the workplace gets eviscerated? I've talked to probably a dozen companies since COVID of employees of more than 100, and not one of them who polled their employees had more than 10% of the employees wanting to go back to the office. So this is going to become permanent. Say you have 500 people in a company and you used to have 3 floors of a downtown skyscraper. You're going to go down to 1 floor or half a floor, and maybe everybody comes in at least 1 day a week or 2 days a week. So everything is going to change relative to massive change in thinking and jobs and working. This is the new places. So what is the new place? What is the new place to self-identify other than the job? What is the new place to go to interact? I don't know if this is going to affect your business as much, but it probably will, because inside your own companies, you're probably working from home. And what's the new place? I got to think that your industry can come up with an interesting place. And it might be the rental outlet where, you know, if you don't want to buy, you can come in and rent. And here's our rental outlet. And this is what I'm serving for you today. I'm serving as the future team of HGA, right? But the larger you are, the more you need to have somebody who's just focused on looking out, learning your business model, your business processes, and your product line, and then looking out to see, down to the garage level, if you will, in startups, what might disrupt my business model or product line. So increasingly, you need to have somebody who's really focused on the future. I mean, that's why I advise large companies, but I'm also setting up, for example, if any one of you had a particular problem, you could get me for an hour to future face and future proof your company. So increasingly that's going to be necessary because the acceleration of the speed of change in this decade. So right now we talk about smartphones, smart thermostats, smart doorbells. So we're going from dumb to smart. We're going to go from smart to intelligent. Our space, this may not affect your business, but our space, our rooms are going to become intelligent. I mean, literally, I could walk into a room in an intelligent environment, and this will be somewhat commonplace the second half of this decade, and kind of go, room, how many people are in this room before I give my talk, assuming I'm back on the road then? And they'll give me the answer because it's intelligent. Think about that. So that's the externalization of the mind. This is the greatest device ever invented for the externalization of the mind. Now, externalization of the mind means you take something from your mind and you externalize it, right? So those of you like me who make lists, that's the externalization of the mind, right? So the most important list, of course, is the one you do before you go to bed. Like, here's what I have to get up and do tomorrow, so you can get out of your mind and get a good night's sleep. This is the ultimate, right? I know my son's name is Christopher. I don't know his phone number where he lives in Amsterdam, but I just press the button, Christopher. Or how many of you, when you used to travel a lot, would take the picture, oh, N14, that's where my car is parked, because you forget, so you take the picture. So increasingly, we are going to be externalizing our mind. Alexa, Siri, whatever, room. So this is going to happen ever more. Everywhere intelligence will open up to everywhere consciousness. This is hard to grasp, and it might not be much in your wheelhouse, but we're going to have consciousness. We're going to step into conscious environments that are aware of what's going on in the moment. Lots of motion, lots of detection. People, you can walk into a room and say, hi, hold on, hold still. Oh, you're David. We've got your biometrics. David, how can we help you? And it's just phenomenal what's going to happen with that. So democracy and capitalism, the reinvention. Disruption is now. Here's some examples, right? Before COVID, it was not allowed to vote electronically in either the House or the Senate, but they had to change. So that's an example of an external force coming in and changing the mechanics of government. The decentralization. What happened with COVID? The White House and Congress pushed it down to the states. So the governors pushed it down to the cities. So we've had the greatest amount of decentralization of authority, starting with Trump not taking action back in March, up to the governors. And the governors said, well, it's up to the cities, right? Or the counties, right? So we've got a decentralization going on. 70% of the people who live in the United States live in states that have somehow, legalized marijuana or made it medical, and yet it's illegal nationally. So the people are moving faster than the government. So the government's getting disrupted because it's holding on to old ways of legacy thinking and seniority and all those things. That's all going to change. So market forces can't solve everything, right? So the feds need to be a backup. So what COVID has shown us is the old argument of big versus small government is no longer valid. It's much more about just in case. Just in case there's a pandemic, and we will have another pandemic before the end of this decade. It's just, the probability points to it, right? So we need to have public health ready and pandemic scientists ready so that when it happens, we can deploy. So it is government being ready to back up what the marketplace can't do. It's not big versus small or conservatism or libertarianism versus socialism. It's readiness to stand in and help the citizens. We are in a depression. It's not going to last as long as the 30s, but we are in a depression. The second quarter GDP was down 33%. The third quarter GDP is down double digits. I forecast back in April that the global GDP for 2020 would be down 10% compared to last year, and the same for the American GDP. So GDP is going to go down. So we are in a depression, folks. The last time we've had this percentage of unemployment and total unemployment, or we've had the collapse of the GDP, was in the 30s. Now we're going to come out of this probably by 2023, but whole industries are going to go by the board. The airline industry is not going to come back for years. The travel industry, same thing. You just saw, for example, that Disney has changed its whole model, going towards streaming and away from theaters. This type of stuff is going to be the emergence of what happens in the collapse of this depression. I mean, what the first depression gave us, right? It gave us Social Security. So there's going to be new things coming out of this that as a result of being in a depression. And I think, by the way, at least for the rest of 2020 and well into 2021, at your level, the consumer level, there's going to be deflation. There's more supply than there is demand, and that's going to continue. And when the Fed pumped all the money into the system in the Great Recession, it didn't cause inflation. I think there will be inflation in maybe 3 or 4 years, but right now I think you're going to see deflation in your business. You won't be able to raise prices at all, or maybe the affluent communities. So there you go. So climate change, real quickly, it's never happened before. So both scientists and climate change deniers are right, because it's never happened since Homo sapiens have been on the planet. It's the 6th extinction event. Again, I've written 2 books on this, and I've spoken to NASA and the EPA, and I'm regarded as the futurist in the green environmental climate change space. This is the first extinction event caused by a single species, humanity. The silver lining is it's fight or flight. If you live in California, you're well aware of climate change. If you live in coastal Texas, Florida, where I live, or Louisiana, you are aware of the fact that climate change is happening. So we have to face it. And the fight or flight, of course, saber-toothed tiger, do I fight or flight? Humans don't face things until they have to. We're a reactive species. So I've been worried about climate change since the 70s, since the first Earth Day. But you say to somebody, you know, in several decades, something really bad's going to happen. I go, when it happens, fine. It's here. It's now. It's going to affect your business. We have already 1 degree Celsius increase. 3 degrees is catastrophic. The Paris Climate Accord was trying to keep, which nobody has followed, and nobody who signed it or didn't sign it has kept their promises, right? So we're already at 1.5. We will be, excuse me, we're 1.1, we'll be at 1.5 by 2025. So if we're already seeing climate change at 1 degree Celsius increase, average for the planet, 3 degrees, which we're on track for, would be absolutely catastrophic. So by 2030, we have to make changes. We have to go to a finite Earth economy, or there'll be no civilization as we know it by 2100. I'm not alarmist. I'm science-based. I've been speaking about this. I'm connected to the smartest minds on the planet, and this is real, okay? So what does that mean? I wrote a book last year called Moving to a Finite Earth Economy, Crew Manual, because we've all grown up in growth economies. The consumer comes first. GDP is consumption. 70% of the United States GDP is consumption. It's all about me. You're not measured in the GDP world except by how much you consume. Then, of course, is the concept of the circular economy. Reduce, reuse, recycle, starting Earth Day 1970. The problem with that, and a lot of environmentalists still think of it, is that when my co-author, Bob Leonard, and I did the research on this, we found that the circular economy is only 9% of the GDP. So in 50 years, it's failed. So we have to go to a finite Earth economy, which is conscious non-consumption, Earth first. In my book, Entering the Shift Age in 2012, I called this the Earth Century. This is the century where humanity needs to get in alignment and regenerative capability for the planet. There's no way around this. So the 2020s, technological intelligence starts its massive disruption, generational shift, disruptive energy transition, and transportation. Now, energy is 20% of the global GDP, and transportation is 19. So 40% of the global GDP is about to be hugely disrupted as we move from fossil fuels to clean energy, and we move from internal combustion engine to electric primarily, and later hydrogen. I think there's going to be a financial and economic collapse sometime in the middle part of the decade, because if you look at the 50 years, next say 1975 to 2025 of the global economy, it started asset-based and moved to debt-based with the Wall Streetization, if you will, the financialization, the transactional aspect of the American economy versus the production aspect. So prior to coming into this year, there was $275 trillion of debt against a GDP, global GDP of 85 trillion, which is a 3.3 ratio of debt to growth. That can't be sustained. That's why I'm getting into blockchain and looking at it. It may be the solution. Because if you take in all the derivatives, there's $1,300 trillion of debt outstanding. I don't see how that's going to come back. So I think there's going to be some type of huge debt reset going to happen in the middle part of this decade. Significant geopolitical shifts are underway right now. Social upheaval and redefinition, massive changes due to climate change. The old market metrics give way to new. GDP is the only way we measure the success of a country, and it's solely based on production. And of course, you can't have unlimited growth in a finite Earth, right? So we're going to have to come up with new metrics upon which we measure society. It can no longer be about consumption. Now, granted, if we only had 2 billion people rather than the 8 billion people we have, we wouldn't have climate change. We wouldn't have these problems. But we've overpopulated the planet. So we're going to have to come up with different metrics. Even the definition of life, we have the capability to clone humans now. We have in laboratories gone in. There's the case I like to refer to is a young couple realized that she had the dominant Parkinson's disease, and there was a high probability that she and her husband would birth Parkinson's offspring. So they took her egg, froze it, took his sperm, froze it, went into the egg, excised out the DNA of Parkinson's, and then raised the temperature, had them in vitro conceive. And for the rest of the offspring of that couple, there'll be no Parkinson's. We're doing that now. We cloned a sheep 25 years ago. So what is the definition of life? I mean, I have a artificial hip. Will I have artificial eyeballs maybe in 5 years with a guaranteed 10 years of 20/20 vision? I don't know, but we're going to have to face these moral questions. And it was recently as 1966, the first artificial heart, the Jarvik heart, was put in to a human. And the Pope said, that's sacrilegious. The body is God's work. I mean, that's 50 years ago, right? So we're going to come up with a lot of moral limitations to the capacity of what we can do. So 10 years of transformation. It's the most transformative time in history. Get ready. Evolution speeds up. Humanity merges with technological intelligence in the decades ahead. Creative destruction of business models, of business sectors, of the way we do things, of society, of just look at what COVID has done, the creative destruction. I mean, big, huge downtown parking lots are going to be looked at as very anachronistic fairly quickly, right? Massive cognitive dissonance. We're all going through that. We're all struggling with this screen reality. We figured it out. We're figuring it out. But there's always going to be the cognitive dissonance between, well, this is the house I know, but I'm doing everything differently. So some things will be the same, but other things will be completely changed. Be prepared for this. And it's an incredible time to be alive. I mean, certainly as a futurist it is, but if you like change and you change is opportunity. Most people are scared of change. Change is opportunity. If there was no change, there would be no time. The only truth in the universe is change. The universe is always changing. So if you're resistant to change, sooner or later you're going to wake up and be out of business or have real problems. So embrace this time. It's an incredible time to be alive. And with that, I thank you. My website's up here, davidhoule.com. If you want to reach out to me for a consultation or a question, I'm happy to do that. david@davidhoule.com. Evolution Shift is my Twitter following. thisspaceshipearth.org is the nonprofit I set up to create crew consciousness. There are no passengers in Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. And the Sarasota Institute is a 21st century think tank that I am one of the 3 co-founders of and the managing director of. And you can go there and become a member if you want. And I ask that you do. It's only $125 a year for 12 events, and you'll learn about the future. So future-proof your company. So I want to thank you very much. Let me stop sharing here and come back and just say thank you for having me. I have no idea of the time. I think I may have gone on a bit long, but the way this is going to be delivered, you can pause and start again. And thank you very, very much. Have a great decade. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Bill in particular for bringing me in. I want to acknowledge Keith. He got a 2-year difficult window to be the president. And then Jonathan, you're coming in right when the recovery is going to kick in. And I want to thank you all very much. I hope to hear from some of you, and I hope you have a great year and a great decade. Thank you.